Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Chen Ravid. I'm a co-founder and head of product at Accesscode, an open source monetization platform. And I will be talking about open source sustainability for Redis related projects. So, who this talk is for? So this talk is for open source developers who are creating Redis related projects like clients and modules, but it's also for everybody that is actively developing or using open source. The ecosystem is large, and I hope that everybody that's watching will learn something new. This talk is going to be a bit less technical than what you might expect from other RedisConf related talks. I will be talking a lot in a high level manner, but I assure you that if you're into open source monetization and sustainability, you're going to learn something new. So what are we going to talk about? What am I going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is the open source sustainability problem and why it is important that we solve it. Why it is important for open source projects around Redis get funded, and why we all need to pitch in and understand how this is done. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about practical ways of getting your open source project funded, and I'm going to give you some examples for that. And open source monetization and funding is trending now, and a lot of people have started using this. And if you haven't started, this is a good starting place to get going. A bit about me. As I said, I work for Accesscode, and we do open source monetization, and my expertise is helping open source projects generate revenue for their owners. And that's what I do, and that's what we do at Accesscode. And I will share simple and proven ways that almost any open source project can use in order to start generating revenue. I'll give you very specific how-tos and pointers on how to get started. And I hope you guys can learn and follow suit. So open source is everywhere. The world runs on open source, as we like to say, and 90% of modern software uses open source components. Sometimes these components can make up to 70% of the code base, and I've personally even seen more. This is maybe the time to say that I'm going to talk about open source components and not open source systems. I'm going to talk about the small to mid-sized components and not the major, huge systems that have companies incorporated around them. I'm talking about the components that were created by individuals. The average commercial product has about 300 open source components, and that's excluding dependencies. So it's big, it's everywhere. So if the world does run on open source, nobody's paying for gas. And the developers who are creating the amazing software we are all using in our products struggle with getting the resources they need to keep developing their project. They work long hours after work and create great code that we all use for free, but when they need resources to keep developing, to make new features, to fix bugs, to generally make the code more awesome for all of us, they have a hard time doing that without any form of compensation. And there's a paradox where when a project becomes successful, when an open source project takes off and has a lot of users, sometimes that success leads to project abandonment. We see that the more successful a project is, the more resources it needs to keep going. More users means more bugs, more requests. I've heard open source developers saying that they got yelled at by users. Why aren't you fixing this bug? Well, this issue has been open for a month, and so on and so forth. So and I've seen project being abandoned because the owners and the maintainers of the project could not keep up with the requests, and they just said, I'm out, handle it yourself. So, and that's something that should not be happening at all. And if we don't give open source developers resources to continue developing, we get an unsustainable ecosystem. And an unsustainable ecosystem is bad for all of us, for everybody that is developing software. It's bad for the open source community, and it's bad for the Redis community, and it's bad for the software industry in general. So it is in our best interest to support the ecosystem and to support open source projects and developers. So how do we fix this problem? How do we fix the lack of resources? So the unpopular answer, but probably the obvious answer, is monetization. And monetization sounds like a dirty word, but it's not. I will show you how and why it is not a dirty word. So if the solution is monetization, the fact is most developers do not monetize their code. And why is that? So usually developers just don't know where to start, but also I've heard a lot of reasons why developers never try to monetize. Some of them say that monetization is anti-open source. It goes against the values of free software, of free as in Libre software. And that is not necessarily true, and I will show you how. Some developers think that in order to monetize an open source project, they have to close off their code and it stops being open source. That is also not true, and I will show you how. Some developers feel that it is complicated, that you have to start your own company and take lawyers and accountants and set up billing and everything in order to start monetizing your code. That is also not true today. It used to be complicated, it is not anymore, and we'll discuss this at length soon. Another thing is that people think that no one will pay, because if it was free up until now, why should someone start paying? So I will surprise you very soon, and you will see that not only people want to pay, they are already paying. And so most of these assumptions are just false. They're just wrong, and we will go over everything, and I hope that by the end of this talk you will see that all of them are just not true. So let's talk about monetization. So monetization, we like to look at it at a spectrum, and that spectrum is in terms of intensity and who is it for. So let's start with the left part, the least intense part of monetization, and that's asking for donations. Donations are an amazing way of getting a project resources, and a lot of open source projects use it, but the sad fact is that most companies don't donate. A lot of people use open source components that are looking for donations, but I can't say in percentages, but the absolute majority does not donate, unfortunately. And I urge you to donate if you can to open source project. It's important. So donations as a business model is not really a reliable and consistent way of getting the resources you need. Donations are unpredictable, and it's difficult to plan ahead. And donations usually work with very large scale projects who can attract, major contributors, major donors or sponsors who can actually get a project a big enough amount of resources on an annual basis. Another one of the problems with donations is when a donation is given, no value is given back other than the good feeling of donating. So donations are a one-sided road, and even though we get a lot of value from using the code, we don't really get value from donating. Have you ever donated to Wikipedia? We all use it, but rarely do we donate. I donated, by the way. So there are a lot of projects who use monetization. For example, Node Redis, which is a very popular Redis client. I'm sure you all know it, and it's an amazing project. I think over 20,000 stars on GitHub. Super talented team, amazing project. And I checked on Open Collective, which is the platform they are asking for donations on. It's also a great platform for asking for donations. And as of the writing of this presentation, this is how much they made from donations. And I think we can all agree that this amazing team and this amazing product deserves more and needs more to keep evolving and to keep developing. So, and this, by the way, this is public data you can get off of Open Collective. So I hope I'm not hurting anyone. So let's look at the other side of the graph, the other side of the bell curve. And that is full commercialization. Full commercialization means that the open source project is also it becomes a company. It becomes something that is fully commercial, and the guys at Redis did exactly that. And it's an amazing initiative. And the guy behind Redis created a company or a venture around Redis. Redis is a Java client for Redis. I'm sure you're all aware of. So what he did a double tier system, like an open core system, like a lot of people call it. He has a free tier on GitHub and a paid tier on a dedicated website with branding and all the legal framework and billing and sales and everything. And that's amazing. But the fact is that full commercialization, like on Redis, is usually beyond the scope of the average project. Redis is a big project, and there's somebody very dedicated behind it. And he took the time and the work to set up everything, probably incorporate as a company, create the website, maintain it, get send quotes to users, to buyers, etc., etc. And that's a lot of commitment. And that's usually beyond what the average developer wants to spend or invest in his product. So the average developer is not an entrepreneur. So most developers are looking for something in the middle of the curve, something between donations and full commercialization. They need something that is dependable and consistent, but they can't or won't go to the length of full commercialization. So where is this famed middle? So this middle of the curve, the way we see it at Xcode, is that you offer the code for free, but you offer paid value on top of the free code. So value is always a good business model. If you offer value for payment, people would be willing to pay, of course, if there is indeed value. And I'm going to go through some proven monetization models that work on the free code paid value concept. And these are proven by many other companies and many other projects, and not just the stuff we do at Xcode. You can also see that this is done everywhere. And the value you can provide with this concept is through services, through features, or through licenses. And we're going to go through each one of those and talk at length on each one of those. So this concept works for most projects. It's not on the left side or the right side of the curve. It works for the majority of open source projects. You don't need to incorporate it as a company. It's pretty straightforward, and you can get started in minutes with not too much hassle. So let's dive into the various models. So first of all, let's start with services. So offering services, you can offer services on an ad hoc or like a one-time thing, or you can offer like on an ongoing basis. Services can be support, like technical support. It can be bug fixing or giving a priority to solving an issue or a bug. Services can be also customizations. We've seen developers customizing or giving tailor-made versions of their code to fit specifically into someone's project with database changes or UI changes or anything that will help integrating the open source project into a specific product. So that's also something that's possible and you can start doing today. Another thing is using your expertise and in your field and offer consulting to people who are using your open source component, or even people who just need your expertise. Once you own a repository that is popular and it infers that you are an expert in the field, you can offer consulting on top of that knowledge. And the only thing you need to do is just say, I'm offering consulting. You don't need to do anything more than that. And with Xcode, we've even made that a bit easier, but you can just write on your README file that you're offering consulting and get going. So how does this work? You have a public repository on GitHub with the free version of your code, and you just say, hey, I'm offering services on top of this. Email me or contact me or go to my Xcode page or whatever and start offering services. So that's fairly easy and it's very flexible. Anybody can do this, and it's a great way to get started without making any changes to your code or something. Moving forward, the open core model. The open core model is another great way of offering code. The guys at Redis did something similar, but you don't need to go to the lengths of commercialization to do it. So open core basically means that you have a free and paid tier, and a free version and a paid version. And usually developers use that for either offering a pro version with more features, more functionality, integration to other third parties, plugins, more support, etc. And I've also seen an original use for that to use the paid version as the version that is more frequently updated. For example, the free version is updated once a month, and the paid version is updated once a week, and that's great for like CVEs or like security issues. So that's also a great way of monetizing or of monetizing and offering value for people who pay. So how does this work in real life? So you have a public repository on GitHub that has the free version, and you keep your paid version, your pro version, or your more frequently updated version in a private repository on GitHub also. And the thing we do, the way we do it at Access Code is that we provide a paywall that prevents people accessing your repository unless they paid. You can do this on your own. You don't need Access Code to do it, but it's pretty easy to do without. It's pretty easy to do on our platform, but you can also do it on your own. And once people pay, they get access to your pro version or more frequently updated version. It's pretty straightforward. Dual licensing, the last model we'll discuss, is another great way of monetizing open source, and I've seen it used a lot, and many big companies are using dual licensing to get started, and it's very easy to adapt even as an individual. Dual licensing basically means that you keep the same code, but on different repositories with different licenses. The code is exactly the same, but the license is different. So usually the way it works is that you keep a restrictive license version of your code for free. I don't want to go into the depths of open source licenses and their limitations and what is a permissive or copyleft licenses and permissive licenses. I'm also not a lawyer, so I can't give you legal advice, so this is not legal advice. But I can tell you that restrictive licenses usually pose some restrictions on companies who create proprietary software. If you're using an open source copyleft license in proprietary software, it can sometimes cause issues that usually commercial lawyers in legal departments do not like. So usually restrictive licenses create issues for commercial use. So you keep your restrictive license version for free, but you give a permissive or a proprietary license version for a fee. So if a company wants to use your code in a commercial product, they need to pay. And the way it works is that, for example, if you keep a public repository on GitHub that is GPL licensed, and GPL is a great way for restrictive or copyleft licensing, and you keep the exact same code but with a more permissive license like the MIT license or any other license. You can have a proprietary license of your own or choose from one of the existing open source licenses there are. So pretty much like the open core, you keep a paywall that prevents people of accessing your private repository. And if somebody wants to buy the MIT license or the proprietary license, they have to pay. So this is a great way that you can utilize licensing to prevent access or prevent usage of your free code that's free and open source. But if somebody needs a different license, you can offer that for payment. So it's a great way, and we have several users doing it very successfully. So let's run a quick comparison of the three models we just discussed. So first of all, let's start with services. So there's something we call compensation ratio, and that means the ratio between how much you worked and how much you get compensated. So the thing with services is that you have a one-to-one compensation ratio. That means that if you worked for 1 hour, you're going to pay for 1 hour. If you worked for 1 month, you're going to get paid for 1 month. With open core and dual licensing, you actually have a digital product. So the compensation ratio is 1 to n. You worked 1 unit of time and you can be compensated n times or to infinity. Well, maybe not infinity, but you can, once you have a digital product, you can sell it as many times as you want. So that's the main difference between providing a service or providing products like in open core and dual licensing. In terms of repositories, services require that you have only one public repository, just like you have today on GitHub. But if you want to offer open core or dual licensing, you're going to need 2 repositories, for open core with a different set of code and for dual licensing with a different license. In terms of availability, services of course require you to be available, and that means that you can only provide those services when you have time. That does not work for people who have very demanding day jobs, but for the open core and dual licensing, you do not need to be available. You have a store that's running and selling code or licenses. You can be at work. I hate this phrase, but this is a great way of passive income. So I don't like saying passive income, but you can use open core and dual licensing while you're at your day job and make money when you're there. So the great thing about services is probably the easiest to start. You don't need to do anything other than saying you want to offer services and pricing them. With the open core model, it's a very popular and very easy to explain concept. A lot of people use this. Many of the big open source companies are using it, so it's not a foreign concept. And you have a lot of control over exactly what type of code and what type of code is out there for payment or for free users. So it's you get very granular control over that. And with dual licensing, I think that probably needs the least amount of work, because you don't need to be available and actually do the work like in services, and you don't need to actually create another version and maintain another version of your code like in open core. You just relicense your code, put it out there, and you're good to go. So it's the three models can work together. You can offer services and dual licensing, or services and open core. They work together great, so you don't need to pick just one. Pick the ones that work for you. So moving on to pricing. Pricing can be sometimes daunting to people, so to developers. So I want to give you some rules of thumb about how to price your open source items. So I'll divide the discussion into services and to products like code or licenses. So when you price your services, try to think in an hourly rate state of mind, and keep your standard hourly rate like it is today. If you're not sure what it is, check on other developers, ask around what is the average hourly rate for people of your expertise and years of experience, and price according to that. So don't try to give discounts on your hourly rate, but don't go too high also. Try to use the industry average if you're not sure. And if you do want to give discounts, do it in bulk. Use hour packages instead of offering 1 hour. Try offering 4 or 5 hours. So if you're charging $100 an hour, and so sell a 5-hour package, but for $400. So give the discounts in bulk. Don't give the discounts on your hourly rate. And a bit about code and licensing. From what we've seen when we saw people selling on Xcode, we saw that small components warrant small prices. And if you price small, you get more transactions. And more transactions are better than a small amount of big transactions, because the big transactions just don't happen on open source components. Unless your project is incredibly large and complicated and extremely difficult to replace, price small and you'll get more transactions. And also you can change your pricing. So start lower than you think, and if you see that people are buying, you can gradually increase the price until you see that the demand evens out. Everybody's experimenting, and that's totally fine. So you're better off with more transactions. Another thing we saw is that you should usually offer code or license access with a subscription, and not like on a one-time thing, because especially with licenses and code, people want to get continuous access to your private repository because you keep updating it. So they want to have an ongoing access to that. So a subscription is a great way to go. And we've seen that annual prices or annual packages usually work much better than the monthly subscriptions. I'll give you an example. We have one user that is offering an MIT license version of his code. He has a GPL license on GitHub, but he's offering an MIT license version of his code on Xcode. And when he started, he asked for $30 per month for the license, and obviously it did not make a lot of transactions on that. So when we discussed this with him, we offered him to change it to $50 a year for the license, and we told him, listen, you might get less transactions You might get less revenue per transactions, but you're going to get much more transactions. And that's exactly what happened. He's one of our top grossing sellers today because he's selling a lot of MIT licenses for his code. So that's another way to go. And when you're selling for a reasonable annual price, you're going to get more transactions than a high monthly price. Lastly, on the pricing thing, when you price your project, try to think like a customer. Try to think, would you pay this much to use this code? Would you pay this much to get this license? And if you're not sure, lower the price. Lower prices work great, and you can always increase the price if you see there's a lot of demand. Another thing that a lot of developers struggle with is promoting their project. And many developers do not know where to start. We all want to have as many people use our projects as possible because that's why we create an open source project. We want them to be out there and creating value for others. And sometimes it's difficult to get more people aware of your project. So I'll give you a few tips on how to do that and get more people to use your open source project. So first of all, where you need to start is with your README file. And your README file on GitHub is your billboard. It has to look great. It needs to feel professional. It needs to feel that the project is actively being developed. It needs to have all the information about your project. It needs to have the documentation and the installations instructions and everything you would need to get going with this project. And README leads to trust. And if you get the trust of users, they would use your code. And we say be the repository you'd want to use. Make sure that people understand that the repository is well maintained, well documented, and your personal presence needs to be felt. The reason people use open source components and trust open source components is many times because of the team and the person behind the code. Nobody likes to put an abandoned piece of code in a commercial product. If I'm using a component, I want to know that there is somebody that's actively developing it. There is someone I can contact if there's a problem. I want to be able to trust the person and not just the code. And that goes a long way. And your personal presence as a developer, as a team, makes a world of difference in that. And lastly, eyeballs. If you want to get more people to your project, you need more eyeballs, more paying users. And that goes for paying and non-paying users, by the way. So if you want more people to visit your project and use your project, use content. Create great content, create blog posts, media, use social media, post on forums, content about your project. You have a great project, that means you have great content. Share your development process, share your roadmap, share your problems, share success stories, share products that are using your code. And be transparent. Don't be afraid to share bugs, to share issues, to share concerns. That always works. And if you are consistent and if you keep posting all the time about your project in many places, I assure you that you would get more eyeballs, and more eyeballs means more users. And eventually, if your project is good enough, that also translates into revenue. So we're almost done. Let's do a quick summary of what we've discussed. So first of all, if you want to get started with monetization, you need to choose a monetization model that works for your project, either services, features, or licensing, and you can choose one or more. Next, you need to set up your repositories if you're selling licenses or code, or set up service items if you're offering that, and make sure you're providing value that is worth paying for. If you offer things that are not worth it, nobody will pay. So I'll leave you to think. You know what's valuable and whatnot, and make sure that you are offering something of value. And lastly, promotion. Don't be afraid to shout. Don't be afraid to show your project, to put it everywhere. Use great, compelling content and send as many people to your project. Create a great README and start getting as many people to your project as possible. And that's pretty much it. I thank you guys very much for listening so far. My email is at the beginning of the first slide, and if anybody needs any assistance in getting his monetization process started and needs to ask or consult, I'm here and I'll be happy to help. I hope you guys enjoy RedisConf. I know I have. Thank you and good luck.